massive and unwanted. She was destined for the butcher. One human changed everything. The alien market was loud, the smell of smoke and metal in the air. Traders shouted over one another, selling cages of frightened creatures. Some were tiny and weak, some were dangerous and chained in steel, but all of them were for sale. Then, the crowd grew quiet. Heavy footsteps echoed on the dusty ground. A shadow appeared, larger than the guards dragging her forward. She was met than any alien in the market, her shoulders broad, her skin marked with scars. Her wrists were bound in heavy iron cuffs, her ankles chained. The auctioneer grinned and raised his voice. Here she is, the biggest catch of the season. Too big to breed, too strong to work, perfect for the butcher's table. Laughter spread through the crowd. Some shouted cruel jokes. Others guessed how many people her meat could feed. She kept her head down, her long hair covering most of her face. She did not look at anyone, not even when someone threw a rotten fruit at her. She had been sold before, many times, but never kept. Every time, she was returned, called useless or ugly. This time, she knew, would be her last. The butcher had paid well for her, and she would not see the next sunrise. From the edge of the market, a human man walked past the stalls. His clothes were dusty, his boots worn. He looked like a trader or maybe just another traveler passing through. He glanced at the cages, at the strange animals, but did not stop. Until he saw her, he slowed, his eyes locking on the chained giant. The crowd's noise faded in his mind. For a moment, he didn't see a creature to sell. He saw a person, standing tall, even in chains. What's her name? He asked the nearest guard. The guard laughed. Name? She doesn't need one. She's meat. The human's jaw tightened. His voice stayed calm. I'll take her. The auctioneer blinked. You? You can't afford her. The human reached into his coat and pulled out a small bag of credits. It wasn't much, but his voice carried a weight that made the laughter stop. I'll pay in full, right now. Whispers began to spread. The butcher's men turned to watch. The human walked to the front, his eyes never leaving hers. You want to live? He asked quietly. She lifted her head for the first time. Her eyes were dark, full of disbelief. She didn't answer. The butcher's assistant stepped forward. She's already been sold. I'm offering double. The human interrupted. Gasps went through the crowd. No one paid extra for the unwanted. The auctioneer hesitated, greed flickering in his eyes. Finally, he slammed the hammer down. Sold. To the human. The butcher's men looked furious, but the trade was done. The chains were unlocked, and she stumbled forward, unused to walking without being pulled. The human didn't touch her. He just nodded, toward the market's edge. Come with me. She followed, too shocked to speak. The crowd stared as they walked away. Some whispered that the human was a fool. Others wondered if he had a darker plan. Outside the market, the noise faded. The road stretched into the wasteland. The sun burned low in the sky. Finally, she asked, her voice rough. Why? The human didn't slow his steps, because no one else would. Her chains rattled as she walked beside him. She didn't know if he was saving her, or just taking her to a different kind of prison, but for the first time in years, she felt a small, fragile thing inside her chest. Hope, and far behind them, in the market's shadows, the butcher's men began to follow. The road stretched far into the barren wasteland, heat waves rising from the cracked ground. The human walked ahead with steady steps. Not looking back, she followed, her chains clinking with every movement, even though they were no longer locked. They were heavy reminders of what she had been, and what she might still become. They reached an old, rusted vehicle parked near a cluster of dead trees. It looked like it shouldn't even start. But when the human climbed inside and pressed a switch, the engine coughed and came to life. He opened the side door for her, and she hesitated before stepping in. The seat creaked under her weight, the metal groaning as if it might break. He drove in silence for a long time. The landscape passed by in shades of brown and gold. every hill and rock looking the same. She kept her eyes low, still, unsure if this was freedom or just a slower path to her end. At last, she asked in a quiet voice, "Where are you taking me?" "Somewhere safe," he said simply. His hands gripped the wheel, his eyes always scanning the horizon. Safe was a word she had heard before. It usually meant a place where the cages were just cleaner. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked at the sky, wondering if she would ever see a home again. Not that she had one anymore. Hours passed, the sun began to sink, painting the wasteland in red light. Then she noticed movement behind them, dust rising in the distance, small black shapes growing larger. Her stomach tightened. "Someone's following us," she said. "I know," the human replied without looking back. "Don't panic." The black shapes became clearer. 4 bikes, fast and sleek, their riders wearing armor marked with the butcher's insignia. Her pulse quickened. She had seen what those men could do. They didn't take prisoners. The human pressed harder on the accelerator. The old vehicle groaned, metal rattling. "Hold on," he said. The bikes drew closer, the roar of their engines cutting through the air. One rider pulled alongside, aiming a weapon at the vehicles. Tires. Without warning, the human jerked the wheel, smashing the side of the vehicle into the bike. The rider tumbled into the dirt, disappearing in a cloud of dust. She stared, wide-eyed. "You fight them." "I don't run from wolves," he said. Another bike sped ahead, blocking the road. The human didn't slow down. He swerved sharply, the vehicle sliding over loose gravel, missing the rider by inches. The pursuers regrouped, to staying behind. One coming up on the side again. Her fear turned into something else. Something strange admiration. She had seen many men, but none had faced the butcher's hunters and lived. This human was either braver than most, or insane. Finally, after what felt like hours, the riders began to fall back. The human kept driving until their shapes vanished into the dark horizon. Only then did he slow the vehicle. "You're safe for now," he said, breathing hard. She looked at him for a long moment. "You risked your life." "For me." He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the road ahead. "I told you," he said at last. No one else would. The vehicle rolled on into the night, the stars beginning to appear overhead. For the first time, she felt the weight of her chains a little less. Somewhere deep inside, she began to wonder if this human might actually mean what he said. Far behind them, miles away, the butcher's men were already planning their next move. They hadn't given up. Not yet. The night air was cold when they finally stopped. The human parked the vehicle near the base of a mountain, half hidden by boulders and wild brush. In the shadows, an old metal door was built into the rock, so worn with rust it almost blended with the cliffside. He stepped out, glanced around as if checking for eyes in the dark, then motioned for her to follow. She hesitated, unsure if stepping through that door would bring safety or another trap. Still, the sound of distant engines was gone, and the air smelled of earth instead of blood. She followed him inside. The door led to a narrow passage, the floor littered with bits of rock. The dim light came from old electric strips along the ceiling, some flickering as they passed. At the end of the hall, the space opened into a wide chamber, an abandoned military outpost, its walls scarred with old bullet marks. She froze, staring. It wasn't empty. Figures stepped from the shadows. Some were alien, some human, some of species she couldn't name. All of them carried scars, and all of them looked at her the same way, half wary, half curious. "This is my refuge," the human said. "No one here belongs anywhere else." She could feel their eyes measuring her size, their whispers passing between them. She knew the looks too big, too dangerous, too different. It was the same judgment she'd seen all her life. A small alien child peeked from behind a wall, its eyes wide at the sight of her towering form. She tried to soften her face, to give a gentle smile, but the child quickly hid again. The human led her to a corner room. Inside was a metal bed frame with a thin blanket, a jug of water, and a small shelf. "It's yours," he said. She stepped inside, touching the wall, as if to test if it was real. "Why give me a place?" she asked. "Because you're alive," he answered simply. "And here, that's reason enough." She didn't know how to respond. She'd been given food before, shelter before, but always in exchange for something: labor, obedience, silence. No one had ever given her space without asking for something in return. That night, she lay on the thin blanket, staring at the metal ceiling. She could hear the faint murmur of the others outside, some speaking in low tones about her. She closed her eyes, telling herself she didn't care, but the truth was, it stung. By morning, she had decided she wouldn't stay long. This place wasn't for her. These people might accept the human's word for now, but soon they would turn on her, just like everyone else. When she stepped outside, the human was already awake. Speaking quietly with a few others, he saw her and asked, "Going somewhere?" "I don't belong here," she said, her voice flat. "I never do." He studied her for a moment, then said, "You don't have to belong anywhere. You just have to live." She turned to leave, but his voice followed her, low and steady. "If you walk out there, they'll find you, and you'll end up back in chains. Maybe worse." She paused, her hand on the doorframe. His words were not a threat, just a truth. She hated that he was right. Somewhere deep in the tunnels of the outpost, heavy footsteps echoed. A warning bell rang out, short and sharp, and voices rose in alarm. The human's expression changed instantly. "They found us," he said, and in that moment, she realized her choice was no longer about staying or leaving. It was about surviving. The warning bell still echoed through the tunnels when the first explosion shook the ground. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the dim lights flickered, shouts rising in every direction. The human grabbed a rifle from a rack by the wall and tossed her a heavy metal bar. "You said you don't belong here," he said quickly, "but right now, you do." She stared at the weapon, its weight familiar. In her hands, though, she had never been trained. Another blast boomed, this one closer. Somewhere down the hall, a child screamed. The human didn't wait for her answer. He ran toward the sound of gunfire. She followed, her long strides catching up to him in seconds. They burst into the main chamber, where the others were already defending the entrance. A jagged hole had been blown in the outer wall, and through it came the butcher's hunters, armored and armed, their faces hidden behind mirrored masks. The first hunter leaped inside, raising his weapon. She didn't think. She swung the metal bar with all her strength. The blow cracked his helmet and sent him crashing into the wall. Gasps rising from the defenders behind her. More poured in, firing bursts of energy that scorched the walls. The human crouched low, firing with sharp precision. Every shot dropped another attacker, but there were too many. A section of the ceiling collapsed, trapping two small figures under a fallen beam. The smoke was thick, the shouts drowning in chaos. Without hesitation, she threw the metal bar aside and charged. Her huge hands gripped the beam, muscles straining as she lifted it clear. The children scrambled free, one clinging to her leg before running to safety. The human caught her eye through the haze, and in that split second, something passed between them: acknowledgement, respect. The hunters tried to surround them, but she moved like a wall of flesh and bone. Her size, the very thing she had been shamed for, now made her unstoppable. Every swing, every shove, broke their formation. Still, the fight was brutal. Her arm burned from a grazing shot, and the human had a cut bleeding down his cheek. Yet, neither stepped back. Finally, a long, piercing whistle cut through the noise. The hunters began to retreat, dragging their wounded. They disappeared into the night as quickly as they had come, leaving behind the smell of burned metal and dust. Silence settled slowly over the chamber, broken only by the sound of breathing. The defenders looked at her differently now, no longer with fear, but with something closer to gratitude. She wiped the sweat from her brow, meeting the humans' gaze. He gave a faint smile. "Told you," he said, "you belong here more than you think." She didn't answer, but for the first time, she didn't feel like leaving, far away, beyond the mountains. The butcher would hear of his hunters' failure, and he would not take it lightly. The outpost was quiet the next morning, but it was the kind of quiet that felt stretched thin. Everyone knew the butcher would not stop after one failed attack. The air carried a tense heaviness. Like the sky before a storm, she stood outside the chamber where the injured were being treated. Her arm was wrapped in cloth. Still sore from the fight, the two children she had saved kept peeking at her from behind a wall, whispering to each other. It was strange yesterday. They had feared her size. Now they smiled when she looked their way. The human approached, his own cheek stitched from the cut. "They'll come again," he said, his voice low and harder. "I'm not running," she replied without hesitation. The words surprised even her, but they felt solid, true. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Then we train." Training began that afternoon in the wide courtyard carved into the mountain. The human showed her how to move with speed despite her bulk, how to use her size to block passages, how to strike without overextending. She learned to listen for footsteps in the tunnels, to spot the glint of a weapon in the dark. It wasn't easy. Her muscles ached, and more than once she stumbled, but each time she fell, she got back up. The others began to notice. Some even joined in, copying her stances, asking her advice on lifting heavy barricades. One evening, while the sun bled red across the sky, a scout returned with grim news. "The butcher is coming himself," the scout said. "He's bringing more men than before." The human looked at her. "We can still try to evacuate." She shook her head. "No, if we leave, they'll just hunt us wherever we go. This ends here." There was no fear in her voice, only certainty. The others listened, and something shifted. No longer was she the unwanted giant. Now she was a shield they trusted. That night, as the outpost prepared for battle, she sat alone by the entrance, staring into the darkness beyond the mountains. Somewhere out there, the butcher was marching toward them, but, for the first time in her life, she wasn't just waiting for what would happen. She was ready to meet it head-on, and this time, she wouldn't be fighting for her own life alone. The first signs of the butcher's arrival came at dawn. A low rumble that wasn't thunder, but the steady march of armored boots. The ground trembled under the weight of machines rolling over stone. From the highest ledge of the outpost, dust clouds could be seen swelling on the horizon. She stood on the wall, her massive frame silhouetted against the pale morning light. The human was beside her, his rifle slung over his shoulder. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "When they come through, we make them regret every step down below." The defenders took their positions. The air smelled of oil, gunpowder, and the sharp tense of fear. Some of the younger ones whispered prayers. Others just stared at her, as if her strength alone could hold the walls. The butcher's forces came into view, rows of black-armored hunters, vehicles mounted with cannons, and at the center, a towering figure draped in crimson. His mask was carved like a beast's snarling face. His voice carried across the valley. "Give me the giant, and the rest of you will live." No one moved. The human glanced at her, and she stepped forward, her voice booming back. "Come, take me." The butcher raised a hand, and the attack began. Explosions tore into the walls. Hunters surged forward. The defenders fired from the high ground. But the enemy was relentless, climbing, breaking, forcing their way in. She met the first wave head, her hands closing around one hunter's weapon and snapping it in two. She shoved another so hard he crashed into three more behind him. Her size turned narrow corridors into traps, every step she took pushing them back. The human fought at her side, covering her from sharpshooters, calling warnings when enemies tried to flank. At one point, a cannon blast shattered part of the wall, sending him sprawling. Without thinking, she charged through the smoke, grabbing him by the arm and pulling him to safety. But the butcher himself stepped through the breach, towering even over her. His armor gleamed, his movements precise. He swung a massive blade, forcing her back step by step. Sparks flew each time their weapons clashed. Around them, the defenders held the line, but the cost was high. The outpost shook with the chaos of battle. The butcher pressed forward, his strikes heavy, cruel. "You were born to be cut apart," he growled. Her grip tightened. "I was born to break you," she said, and with a roar, she drove him back. Her strength surged beyond exhaustion. Every blow fueled by the life the human had given her, a life worth fighting for. The battle raged, and though victory was far from certain, one thing was clear: she was no longer running from her fate. She was standing in the heart of it, unshaken. The smoke hung heavy in the air when the last echoes of gunfire faded. The battlefield outside the outpost was littered with twisted metal and fallen bodies. The morning sun cut through the haze in sharp beams, lighting the red dust that swirled. Over the ground, she stood at the shattered breach in the wall, chest heaving, her arms streaked with blood and soot. At her feet lay the butcher, his crimson armor cracked and his mask split in two. His eyes, once full of cruel certainty, were dull now. The massive blade he carried was broken in half beside him. The human approached slowly, his limp noticeable, but his grip on his rifle steady. He looked from her to the enemies retreating. Survivors, those few who had fled into the mountains. "It's over," he said quietly, though he sounded more relieved than triumphant. She glanced back at the defenders, at the faces peering from behind barricades. Some were still gripping weapons, others clutched the injured, and every one of them was looking at her not with fear, not with pity, but with something she had never seen directed at her before. Respect. The human stepped closer. "You saved this place." Her voice was low. "We saved it." He gave a faint smile, then nodded toward the open valley. "No one will dare come for you now." The words sank in slowly. Her life had been a chain of cages and markets, of whispered insults and cruel bargains. And yet, here she was free, not because she was hidden away, but because she had fought for that freedom herself. That night, the outpost held no formal celebration, but food was shared, fires burned warm, and laughter returned to the tunnels. The children she had saved climbed onto her lap without hesitation. One of them pressed a small carved stone into her hand, a crude figure, meant to look like her. She held it gently, feeling the weight of what it meant. Later, as the stars came out, she stood with the human at the highest ledge, looking out over the dark mountains. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Why risk everything for me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he rested a hand on her arm and said, "Because you were never what they said you were. You just needed someone to see it, for the first time in years." Her chest felt light. The wind carried the scent of rain from far away, and for once, the road ahead didn't seem so empty. She wasn't unwanted anymore. She was exactly where she was meant to be, and this time, she had chosen it.